Hey, what's going on, guys? Byron here, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about soft bodies. Specifically, some things you need to adjust. It can get a little finicky sometimes. You got to make sure it's a bit of a balancing act. You got to make sure the settings are correct in a lot of different areas, so it can be a little finicky, but you can get some great results with it. We're going to talk about that, and also just a slight little cameo from somebody very dear to me in the beginning of this, so stay tuned for that. Let's go and get started. So this is what we're going to be playing with today. You can see here, I'm just using soft body dynamics with some pretty simple shapes. You know, I'm going to recreate this, and not the exact same thing, but I'm going to recreate it and show you guys how I went about building this and what my approach to it was with the soft bodies. Nothing crazy, but there are some things to note and keep in mind when building out your simulations. I've also made some wallpapers from this available on my Gumroad. If you want to check that out, link is in the description below. With that said, let's go ahead and jump on in. Talking to the microphone. Say hi. Can you say hi?
Hi.
That was a little cameo from my daughter there. She is barely a year and a half. She's already talking and running around. It's crazy. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in here. I'm going to show you guys an example. And I already have this cashed out. This is a scene from the example that you guys saw earlier. And I'm just going to walk through this pretty quick. We can get bogged down in the details all day long, but I want to give you guys a general overview with some specifics in dealing with soft bodies, because there's just so much that you could do with it. But I'll show you how I approach this scene and just some takeaways and some things to note. So one of the things in dealing with soft bodies that you want to make sure that you have a really good idea of what you're wanting to achieve. So you have the end goal in mind, because that's going to help you get the type of geometry that you want in there, the right type of topology. A lot of factors play into how well this turns out and getting you the desired result. So for this, I wanted these to be more of a thicker rubber toy. I didn't want it to be a balloon necessarily. So that's how I approached it. I'll show you kind of how I built these little plus symbols and what I call the jack, like back in the day, the old jack game, with the little metal jacks that you threw on the street. That was before my time. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But it's really simple to build those, and you can control the topology, and then just some spheres. So really simple stuff, but just want to walk through this and show you guys how I built this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just delete these lights. I'm going to keep this camera here, and I'm going to reset my scene simulation settings to default. And the reason I didn't start with a brand new scene is because I wanted you guys to see exactly what settings I changed in here as I'm kind of reverse engineering this process here. All right, so let's bring up our work plane so we know how we're working. And I'm going to leave the camera there, like I said. And the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to pull in a sphere. And we're done. Kidding.
Stop it. Get some help.
All right, so with this here, one thing you want to keep in mind, like I said, is the topology. You do not want to leave this at the standard type of topology for the sphere, because it's not going to work well, because you have these poles. And especially when you're dealing with soft bodies, that does not bode well for a simulation. It just doesn't look good. So I would recommend doing either a hexahedron or an icosahedron, because those are both really good options. They each have their pros and cons. We won't get into that now necessarily, but for now, let's just go with a hexahedron. And I'm going to hide this for the moment. And then I'm also going to create a capsule, because we're going to make the plus sign, the little plus icon there that we had in our example. So I'm going to throw this into a volume mesher. Or sorry, not a mesher. Getting ahead of myself here. I'm going to throw it into a volume builder first. And I'm going to change one of them to be the x-axis. And we're going to bring the radius down to probably about 30. And I'm going to bring the voxel size down to 1. Now, you see we get these little facets on here. That's fine. All we have to do to smooth that out is just add in an SDS smooth, and we're good. So with that, we have our plus symbol. Now, one thing we want to do is make sure we do some good housekeeping and call this plus. And I'm going to duplicate this guy. And then I'm going to hide that, call this Jack. And what we're going to do is add a third one on here. We're going to have that go in the Z direction. Now you see that I'm getting the little facets on this one, but not on these guys. And that's because of the order that they're in inside of the volume builder, because it builds on top of itself. So all I need to do is just pull this SDS smooth to the top of the stack, and we are good. Now, with that said, I am going to throw them into a volume mesher first. And then one little trick here, if you select both of them and you hold down volume mesher and hit Alt, it'll throw them into a mesher individually, which will really help. If you have a bunch of objects here, you don't have to throw one at a time into it. So, and then we'll just name these the same so we know what we're dealing with here. All right, so you can see that our topology here now is actually not that great. And this is what you get when you're building with volumes, which is the power of it. So then now we throw it into a remesher. I was getting ahead of myself there. And as it's calculating, you'll see that it's going to go through and try to rebuild this out of quads with Z remesher, which is actually really cool. Very powerful. But you'll notice that one, it's way too dense, definitely more dense than we want for our soft body sim. And the topology just isn't that great. So there are a few things we can do. And one of those mainly being, we can go in here to the remesh options and we can bring the mesh density. I've tested this out a little bit. I think 2 is what worked best for our purposes and for our simulation. So that's going to give us a good amount of quads and definition, so to speak, still, and retain the shape, but we have way less geometry, which is what we want. Now, one other thing we can do to really help this out is this is crazy simple. We just have a couple capsules, one going in the Y positive and one going in the X positive, and they're the same shape. So all we have to do is tell Cinema 4D, hey, this is symmetrical on the X and Y. And it'll take that into consideration when it remeshes. And we have a much better mesh now because of that. So if I uncheck that, just watch over here, uncheck. So you see how this is kind of sideways. Let me solo this so we can get off this side. This is tilted off the side. These don't necessarily line up all that well. But now if I throw in symmetrical X and Y, it will take that into consideration. So something really cool, especially when you're just building really simple shapes like this. So now I'm going to apply the exact same thing to this jack here. Add in a remesh, Alt Enter, call this jack, bring this down to 2, and add the symmetric option here, but I'm also going to say that it's symmetrical in Z because we have the extra one going in the Z positive. So there we go. There are our 2 shapes. Now, one thing that'll really help out is I'd like to keep a null here called shape build. So that way, if we need to come back and reference these, we can, because we're about to collapse everything down and we want to work as non-destructively as we possibly can. So I'm going to create an object from each of these and pull them out of this stack. And then inside of here, to help speed things up, I'm just going to disable everything and then hide that from the editor. So if we ever need to go back here and reference our shapes, we can rebuild anything we need. If we decide the topology just isn't working well, whatever the case may be, we can make sure that that we can go back and change it. And then let's enable our sphere here. And we have our 3 shapes. So what we're going to do is work on building out the simulation with just these 3 shapes, kind of getting our initial settings down. And then we'll add to the amount of shapes that are in there. And I'll show you a really cool trick on how to do that fairly quick. So one thing that's very important when dealing with simulations is scale. So we're going to bring in our little ragdoll here, little figure, and I'm going to scale these down per object transform, and I'm going to make it probably about up to like the shin, the knee right there, just for reference, just so that it doesn't have to calculate as much, because you're taking into consideration forces like gravity and turbulence and all these things. So it all plays a part in how the sim turns out. So now we have our shapes here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to, throw out another null. And I'm going to call this sim. And I'll put these in here. And I'm going to put these inside of what is called a connect object. And if you haven't used this before, it's an incredibly useful tool. You could also use a fracture object, but I like using the connect. And we're going to uncheck weld. And what this does is it allows Cinema 4D to see everything under here as a part of one group, but still see them individually, so to speak. So the benefit of that is when I apply my dynamic tag, I don't have to apply it to each of these individually, because otherwise I would have to do this, go to softbody and add it. And then anytime I wanted to change settings, I'd have to select all of the tags. And if you have 50, 60, 100 objects, obviously that gets very tedious and change all the settings. So instead of having to do that, all I have to do is just add it to this one and we're good to go. And I just do it with the softbody. You can also add it just as a cloth and then check softbody, whatever you want to do. But then if I do that, I automatically go over to surface, and I usually just turn this off anyway, just to start out with. So softbody does that regardless. And you have what you need right out of the gate. So why not save a few steps? So I just simulation tags, softbody. And one thing I'm going to do also is bring my forces tab, tear that off and bring it right over here. So if I hit play right now, what you're going to see is they just fall down, right? Because there is gravity in the scene applied as a universal force. And that's going to be in our settings. So if we go to Control D, you'll see right here under the simulation tab, under scene, there is the gravity tab. So I'm going to hit 0 on that and 0 that out. And now nothing should happen. That's what we want. So I'm going to add in, just so we get a little movement, a turbulence into our simulation here. And I'm going to build up the strength here, scale. I'm going to pump up the scale, and I'm going to bring down the frequency. And now we start to get some movement. So these are actually, right off the bat, these are actually working pretty well. Let's see if we can get them to kind of run into each other a little more. Let's adjust our strength on this, bring the scale down a little bit and the frequency up. Okay, there we go. So now they're kind of hitting each other. We can kind of see how, I'm going to turn off the wireframe. We can see how they're reacting, they're bouncing, and I like the way that they're reacting right now, which is nice. So I'm going to reframe the camera here for a minute. And I'm going to throw up my camera, and I'm going to throw up my overlay here. So I'm just going to center it for now, and then we can readjust the composition later. Okay, so with these 3 objects, obviously, I mean, this isn't what we want. We want a bunch of objects. So a really cool way to place the objects is I'm going to turn off this connect object here, and I'm going to go into here, and I am going to add these to a cloner object. And then what I'm going to do after I place all this stuff is I'm going to go in and just explain this tag a little better. Actually, you know what? Let me do that first, because we're going to need to do that with the least amount of objects possible. So with these outside of the cloner, let me just really quickly explain how this is working. So if you see these lines here, these are called poles. And down here in your soft body tag, if you go to soft body, under your soft body settings, you can have this set to view the poles either when selected, always, or off. I usually keep it off unless I need it, and then I just say when selected. This shows you basically the simplest way to put it. This is the structure. And what's happening here, let me turn on my wireframe. So what's happening here is if you look down at shoot side and hit side right here under the create, it's shooting a pole from the back side of one quad, one piece of geometry, to the hit side, the back side of another piece of geometry. So these are just bouncing around all over the place and saying everywhere it hits a piece of geometry, it's showing that that's how it's building the structure. And you can adjust the spread of it. You can say there's more, there's less. I can bring down the density. I can up the density. I can add in more poles if I want. But obviously, we want to maximize our simulation. So we're going to try to get away with the least amount possible. So I think it was working pretty well, actually, with how it was. So I'm going to leave that as is. But one important thing to note is that if I were to add another object in here, and I push that back there, and I go back to select my tag, you'll see that I don't have those poles on this object. And if I hit play, it's reacting, but it's not actually calculating it the way that it should because it hasn't drawn the structure of it. So I need to go into the object here, into my tag, and I need to hit down here under create, I need to hit refresh. And now it's going to calculate and take that object into consideration. So if your simulation seems a little off or object seems like it's not reacting the way that it should, that's one thing to check is go in here and be sure to hit refresh. And it's probably just a good habit to do anyway to make sure that you are working properly. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to place a bunch of objects in here. So I'm going to start off with one and put it in a cloner. And I'm going to put the other ones in here. And any other objects that you wanted to clone, you put inside of the cloner. Right, standard deal here. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to say that I want it to be projected on an object. And I'm going to take a cube and just look at my camera view and see how wide this is. And in my example, what I had was them colliding almost like they were in like a fish tank or something. So I'm going to use this as the object that I'm going to clone on. And then we'll use another one as the object that we are going to use as our collider. So I'll call this clone. And under my cloner, we will throw that down. And I'm going to clone the volume of it. And then for our collider, we actually want it to be a little bigger. Make sure I turn that on. A little bigger so that we get all of them inside of there. And I'm going to put a display tag on here. Render tag, display. And I'm going to have it view this as a line so that I can just see the boundary box of that. And this I don't need to see. And now we are in business. So if I up the count here, we'll have it repeat in there. And I'm going to throw in a random effector in here to change the size of them. So under cloner, so we have our random effector. And I'm going to turn off position and I'm going to adjust the scale. So that way I'll do absolute. Go in here just so we get some variation. Actually, I'm just going to do uniform to get more of a drastic difference here in scale. All right, now here's what we're going to do. So we have all these objects. This obviously does not look the way we want it to. And a big no-no in the simulation world is we have tons of geometry colliding with each other right out of the gate. And that is not good because it's going to immediately wig out the simulation, and you don't want that. So, and we have this poking through, what is going to be our collider, and we don't want that. So, what we're going to do is we are going to take this, I'm going to duplicate it, holding down Control, and put a copy of that in the shape build. Because what I'm going to do is collapse this down. So now we have all of these shapes separate. I'm going to drag them out. And now, without the connect enabled, I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to use what's called the dynamic place tool. This is a really cool tool that they've added recently, and it helps with exactly what we're trying to do here. So if you see this handle comes up, and there's this little purple handle here, and this is the magic key. So if I grab this and scale it, you see here that we now get, let me turn these off. We now get everything coming together, and it's taking into consideration all of the geometry, all of the collisions, everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse all of them down, and I'm going to open it up just a little bit here so that they're not touching. So we're going to make sure that these are just far enough apart from each other where they're not colliding, because we don't want that to affect our overall simulation. So now we're getting a much better result. And then what we can do is turn on our connect object. And again, see, we need to make sure that we redraw so that it calculates all of these. And then now if I hit play, you can see that we're getting the interaction that we thought we would. So that's a really cool way to place objects. Instead of having to drag them individually and place them, you can throw them in a cloner and then use that dynamic place tool to help clump them all together, which is really cool. So now that we have this and we have the sim working the way we want, we're getting nice interactions here with the jigglies and whatnot. One thing that we're going to do is we want to also add in a rotation so that we get more of a, let's see, we'll leave that there, angle speed. So we get more spin on it, on the whole simulation here. And I'm going to up this to maybe 50. There we go. Just to give it more, I'll go back down to 20. Just to give it a little extra character there. And then we're going to add our collider. So we have our box here. Okay, so one thing we need to do is make sure that our box is actually wide enough to where it's not intersecting with any of the objects in here. Because that would not be good, and it'll wig out right at just as soon as we hit play. So now that collider's there, I'm going to right click, go to simulation tags, and I'm going to make this a collider. And one thing that'll help, whenever it actually collides, helps it kind of slide instead of just stick to a surface, is I'm going to turn down the bounce and the friction. So that way, if we hit play, we'll see now that we're getting, it's not going too crazy right now. Well, it's actually going through that. Hold on. We don't want that. Ah, yes. Okay. So something to keep in mind. These are actually colliding inside of the cube. And under your collider, you need to make sure that the collider is set to the proper side, because right now it's saying that it's only colliding with the front, but these are hitting the back side. So I need to just select back. And then now we'll get the interaction that we would expect. So now they're bouncing off. So you can't tell that much, but what we're going to do is actually inflate these to where they blow up and get stuck on the surface. So I'll show you how to do that real quick. You can do that one of two ways. One way is you can literally just use this balloon and set the pressure to, like, I don't know, 3, have it go over the course of 24 frames. And we could just hit play and see what we get. and that doesn't work. Now, that's completely expected because for some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason, the balloon system right now for it inflating is kind of I don't want to say it's broken, but it's not as consistent as you would think it would be. So there's actually another way because it also messes with the surface integrity of the soft bodies whenever if it overinflates. So there are certain instances that it can work and certain instances where sometimes it doesn't. So you can play with this. If I just set this to 1, you'll see that it doesn't really do too much because 1 is really just the amount of inflation that it should have. So if you set it to overpressurize right at the beginning, you're going to get the result that we had. So sometimes it works if there's not as many objects. Sometimes it doesn't. It's not really consistent. So I actually don't use this all that much. What I prefer to do is actually a little trick here is I adjust the target length of both the soft body and the surface. So if you look here, I'll go to frame 12. And this is what I did in the example because I feel like you get a better, more consistent result with doing it this way. And I'm going to set this to, let's say 200 and set this to 200. And you will now see that they will inflate and be bound inside of the collision object, which is that box. So we're getting the result that we would expect from the balloon without using the balloon. So it really just depends on what you're doing. I think the balloon works pretty well if you use it with vertex maps on an individual object. But if you're doing it as a group here, I don't know if it works as well. But in a situation like this, using the soft body target length and the surface target length actually works really well. So let me jump over. I want to show you an example where the balloon inflate actually works pretty well. And that's when using vertex maps. So what I did for this guy is I just went in and I selected the edges here, or seams, if you will, and created a vertex map and a selection set based off of that. And I inverted it so that the non-edged areas are selected. And I put that into, if you go into balloon, I have this balloon up and then under the surface, under mix animation, I threw the vertex map in here and I'm using this as a pin. So that way when I inflate, it's only going to inflate the areas that I have selected. So if I play this, you'll see that we get an inflation. Now, obviously, that doesn't look very flattering, but if we add a subdivision surface on that, we get a much better result. So the inflate works pretty well at times. And if I just view the vertex map, you can see that it's pinning, so to speak, those areas, that selection, and it's only inflating the areas that I have selected through the vertex map. So, and in order to do that, it's really simple. Like I said, you just go through here and select the edges you want to select with loop tool or however you want to select it. And then hit V, go to select and say set vertex weight. And then whenever you choose, whenever you have your selection set to what you want, you just hit OK and it'll create a selection set based on what you have chosen. And then you just drag that into, like I said, the mix animation dependent. You can also use the vertex maps in here under surface, under target length. You can use it in the soft body. So there are a lot of different areas that you can play with and test out to see what works best for what you're trying to achieve. So going back to our example, our main example here, what I want to do now is I have this working the way that I want. So I'm actually going to cache this out and then we'll come back and I'm going to jump in and just do a really quick lighting setup so you can see how I approached that aspect of it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to cache and I will do cache scene. Okay, so our scene is cached and we now have our soft bodies reacting the way that we want. So as far as lighting goes, pretty straightforward. Nothing crazy. If you do want to check out more information on lighting and how to go about lighting and approach that, you can check out my video that I have linked up here, and that will go through 3-point lighting setups, HDRI, all that stuff to help kind of up your lighting game, especially with Redshift. It applies across the board in all any type of 3D program, but because you learn the principles of lighting. But if you want to check that out, I would highly recommend it. But for this, all I'm going to do is throw in a HDRI. And we're going to use the trusty old. Actually, if I go into here, I'm going to use the plus library. And then we'll jump in here and use the creative office. Drag that. And we will set this to not show the background. And then I'm going to change my layout real quick just so that we can get a better idea of our lighting layout. I already have these textures here. These are some Grayscale Gorilla Plus materials that we can just throw on here. But actually, I'm just going to throw a just a white one on the whole bit here, just so that we keep it simple for now. So just if I do that right out of the box, let's go back here. Camera 1. And we don't need that anymore. Turn that off. There we go. Our box was hiding. We weren't hiding our box in the render view, so we weren't able to see it. Okay. One thing to note when you're rendering, especially with Redshift, a little quick tip here is to go into here, and I can go into this connect object and I can say, go into render tags, throw in a Redshift object tag on there. And then in here, I can go into geometry and I can tell it to override, and I can do a subdivision surface basically at the time of render. And I'm going to bring the edge length and the subdivisions down. So now when we render it, we get a much smoother result. So we're not having to worry about going through and putting on a HyperNerbs object on every single one of these. We can just calculate it at render time. It's just a lot easier that way. So we have light coming in from that side, and I'm going to throw in an area light, and I'm going to, our camera's here, so I'm going to have it kind of be a little bit of a fill, maybe another little bit of a key. Actually, I'll have it be a little bit of a, let's see. Okay, I don't want it to be as hard as that key that's coming from the HDRI, but we do want to supplement it a little bit. So then I'm going to bring the exposure down to 1, and actually I'm going to go into my Grayscale Gorilla Plus library, area light maps, and I'm going to bring in, where is that, volume 2? Here we go. Bring in this guy, put it on the light, do color and temperature, and then we're going to change this to disk, just to diffuse that light a little bit. And then we're actually going to pump it up by 2. Actually, just 1. There we go. Yeah, we'll level that out at 0. So now we're getting a little bit more light fill on this side. And then one last thing we can do is actually add in one more HDRI, but we'll only use that as a background. So we go into our light, dome light. Let's call this BG. Give a little bit more screen space here so you guys can see what I'm doing here. View it. Change the color to maybe like a off-white. There we go. Get a little warm tones in there, some warm tones. And then I'm also, for this light, I'm also going to make, since our HDRI is bright and it has more warmer tones, I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring the temperature up on this guy to make it a little cooler. There we go. So now we're getting a little cooler tones on this side. There we go. And then for this, I'm going to go into details and I'm going to bring, you can have this not affect the image at all, but you see it looks a little weird. So I'm actually going to, I think I like it. I like to use the background object as also a little bit of a fill, and I leave the reflections on. So I just let that act as a little bit of a fill as well inside of there to pump it up. And then you can see from there, you can go in and you can actually, I mean, we could just, throw colors on individual ones that we want to throw colors on. So say I wanted to make that one blue, throw blue on there. And then you just go in and start art directing and lighting and tweaking and, adjusting to your heart's content. So that's the basic setup for the example that you guys saw at the beginning of this video. That's kind of how I went about lighting it and building it. So just some things to keep in mind. Again, just a quick wrap up. Be sure of your scene scale. Make sure to that your geometry is light enough to be able to handle the soft body sim. There is a way you can also, I'll probably cover this in another video, but there's a way that you can do a low res proxy and then apply through a mesh deformer, apply the simulation to a higher res mesh, which is pretty cool. And then you can use the vertex maps. So there's so many things that you can do. If you guys are interested in me diving further into either one of those, feel free to hit me up. Let me know in the comments. But otherwise, I'm going to leave this video as is for now. And hopefully something here was helpful for you guys. And we'll catch you on the next one. All right, guys, that's going to be a wrap. So a couple things, though, that I wanted to mention. One in particular, that if you aren't getting the desired results from the soft bodies, be sure to go into your project settings, hit Control D or Command D, and you're going to see inside of the simulation tab, you're going to see the sub steps and the dampening. You can adjust those to get different results. It's going to help slow down the simulation with the dampening, and also the sub steps is going to help interpolate more frames for you. Also, thank you guys so much for the love and the continued support. I mean, honestly, it's been awesome. Quick question, you guys, if you guys like the talking head in the beginning and the end, I'm trying to figure out the format for this and just kind of playing with some different things for the channel. So let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want me to sit here and talk and intro the video, or if you want to just dive in and just get into it, Hopefully something in this video was helpful for you guys. As always, I appreciate the love, support. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and let me know what you guys think. And I appreciate all the love you guys have shared so far. Be sure to check out my other videos here, and one in particular about lighting that'll help you kickstart your lighting adventure, your lighting journey inside of Redshift and Cinema 4D. Get it off to a good start. All right, guys, that's it for this video. We'll catch you on the next one. And as always, work hard, stay humble.